Welcome back to Falcons Central Radio Show on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I'm Aaron Freeman, founder of FalFans.com. I'm joined by my co-host Scott Karasik over at SportsNut. We are back this week to talk about the Atlanta Falcons. As usual, we will be talking about some of their recent roster moves. We will be talking about their recent training camp practices, as well as talking a little bit about the upcoming preseason game and the depth chart. That was the unofficial depth chart that was released earlier this week. And we'll, as usual, answer you guys' mailbag questions at the end of the show. So, Scott, let's get these roster moves out of the way because it was a lot of sign this guy and cut this guy over the last week since we last did this show. Some of the moves that we're referring to, of course, the Falcons cut Torrey Green, who had the unfortunate rape allegations that emerged from his days at Utah State. So the Falcons quickly got rid of him. They picked up Dominique Tavell to replace him, but then they cut him earlier today. Replacing Tavell was Matt Wells. Any of those moves jump out to you before we talk about the other major move that wound up not really mattering that much?
The Matt Wells signing I actually liked. So Tavell, I was like, oh, camp body. Torrey Green, I was like, oh, camp body. But I liked Matt Wells when he was at Mississippi State. He played more of a strong safety than an actual linebacker, but he was 220 pounds and runs a 4.4, so he's an athletic dude. Very similar in makeup to Deion Jones as far as athleticism. Doesn't have the same kind of instincts Jones has, but if he makes the team, it'll be as a special teams guy. He'll be that speed guy who could end up taking over there. I think he could be a good fit long-term as like a special teams, like emergency reserve type dude, the way Nate Stupar was. But he's got to make the roster first. And I think out of all the signings this past week, that's the only one that's going to make that could potentially make the roster.
Okay. Yeah, I don't remember Matt Wells, while he was at Mississippi State, but I do remember the Falcons showing quite a bit of interest in him before the 2015 draft. He was one of the guys that they had I think a private workout with. Maybe I can't remember if they brought him to Atlanta or they went to Mississippi State to work him out. But yeah, so it's not surprising that they picked him up. I do think it's weird, though, just one note on the Dominique Tavell, that to cut a guy after 3 practices, obviously I don't have a clue why they cut him, but it is one of those things where if you sign a guy, you would think that you would want to give him more than 3 practices before, getting rid of him. But if he didn't play well or some other reasons, then, I'm not going to sit here and second guess them. But
they could have also been waiting for Wells to get available.
Well, I think
Wells was trying out for the Rams and trying out for the Raiders this past week, and then he finally became available, so they signed him.
Okay. Yeah, well, whatever. Hopefully Matt Wells will last more than 3 practices, because if he doesn't, then we'll be talking about him getting cut on next week's show. So the other major move that happened in the past week that was once again negated because this guy decided he wanted to retire after 1 practice was Lance Moore. Falcons signed the ex-Saints receiver. There was a little bit of at least for my part, there was a little bit of confusion why the Falcons went out and got a veteran of Lance Moore's esteem. If they just wanted a body, they could have just signed some, first or second year guy. But to go out and get someone who's played over a decade in the league, that usually suggests that you intend for that guy to make the roster. Moore had 1 practice. I don't think it's a coincidence that it happened to have a heat index of over 110 that day, and then he decided he was done. It just I know Lance Moore is not new to heat or anything, but these last couple of summers he's been doing training camp in Pennsylvania and Michigan, so that Atlanta heat probably was a little bit of a culture shock. He hasn't experienced anything like that the last couple of years, and maybe he was like, I don't really feel like going that hard in this heat for what amounts to be probably a long shot to make the team.
And the Saints normally do their training camps in like West Virginia
Yeah.
or like mountain areas like Tennessee or Kentucky. They don't do them in New Orleans, which is hot and just grimy this time of year. I don't think anyone from New Orleans would get mad at me for saying that either. Louisiana, on the Gulf, Mobile, Biloxi, that whole Gulf area is just like an armpit this time of year. The same way Charleston is. It's just too hot, too humid to actually have football practice.
We got a question about Lance Moore from Vienna Falcons, and I'll give Scott, you can start us off on answering this one. But he asked, thoughts on why they signed Moore? Insurance policy for injuries, or were they simply unhappy with what the wide receiver group showed so far?
I think it was they just wanted to have more competition to push. Do I think that Lance Moore would have eventually made the roster? No. I don't think he was being signed with, hey, you're guaranteed a roster spot. I think he was signed with, hey, you have a shot to compete. You got to beat out J.D. McKissick, Jordan Leslie, David Glidden, Devin Fuller, Corey Washington, Nick Williams, Aldrick Robinson for a roster spot. If you can beat out a couple of those guys, you'll have a roster spot. And he didn't do it. So he didn't get a roster spot because he retired.
Yeah. I didn't think he was going to make the team just because of his age at this point and the fact that he's not really much of a special teams contributor. And when you're that low on the depth chart, you either have to be, basically you have to play special teams at that point when you're the fourth or fifth guy on the depth chart. And that wasn't really his forte. So didn't seem like it was a likely chance of him sticking, but it was interesting to see that them go after and get a veteran that, Lance Moore, unlike, someone like Chris King, had a legitimate shot at least pushing for that number 4 spot behind Julio, Sanu, and Hardy. He probably wouldn't have won it, but, they clearly wanted to upgrade the competition there. And, it didn't work out for them. They still have a roster spot open now. So we'll see what happens with that. If they go out and get another wide receiver, or they address some other need. All right, Scott, let's talk a little bit about what's been going on the past week in training camp. We don't happen to have Gina Thomas on to help us along, proctor us along on this journey through training camp, but there have been a couple of interesting developments over the last week in the second week of training camp. A little bit of injuries. Injury bug has hit the Falcons quite a little bit. We did get to see Desmond Trufant come back from his hip injury and return to practice this week. And I should say none of the Falcons' injuries are long, at least according to head coach Dan Quinn. They're not long-term injuries, but they seem like they're substantial enough to potentially keep guys out of this first preseason game. I'm referring to Teron Ward, who's dealing with an ankle injury. Levine Toilolo's been dealing with a hand injury these past couple of days. And Keanu Neal has a trunk injury, which whatever that means, he's got an injury somewhere in his torso, I guess. I think Dan Quinn gave an update that Neal is about 50-50 for Thursday's preseason opener against the Redskins. I would assume that if he's not, 100%, that they will hold him out. There's no reason to risk him getting further injury in a meaningless preseason game. We probably won't see those guys, but that'll create opportunities for some other guys like Gus Johnson and Brandon Wilds, Arthur Lynch, Kamal Ishmael, Sherrod Neesman, those type of guys that will probably get some actual work on during the preseason game, and maybe they'll take advantage of it.
I think they will. I think you'll get to see a little bit more of Neesman than you're probably expecting, and I kind of want to see a little bit more of Neesman because from what I saw in college, he and Threezy should probably be the top 2 reserve safeties. If it were up to me, they'd be the top 2 reserve safeties. I understand Ishmael I like Neesman a lot more than Ishmael, and I know when you start watching him play, Aaron, you're gonna like him a lot more than Ishmael. Not that you like Ishmael as it is, but
I don't have an issue with Ishmael. I've always been iffy on people that say he should be the starter. That's where I sort of draw the line. I think he's a good backup.
Now that you've got Neo. Well, I mean, I was saying he should have been the starter last year because William Moore blew last year.
I think Ishmael would have been worse, but
Ishmael
again,
played more than William Moore did last year, and he did okay. He wasn't asked to cover deep, though.
Ishmael's fine. I'm not going to badmouth Kamal Ishmael. He does, as long as you don't. I don't know. Yeah, he's fine.
I'm putting you on the spot with him.
I don't have negative feelings towards Kamal Ishmael. It's just he's fine. Yeah. We also had the usual Friday Night Lights event last Friday. It's pretty much the norm. Opportunity for fans to go out and a lot more fans than usual for normal training camp, get out to see the Falcons do a scrimmage and whatnot. Opportunity for some of these young guys to sort of stand out. One player that I know a lot of people were raving about was C.J. Goodwin. And I also heard some good things about what Austin Hooper was able to do in that game, in that scrimmage. Scott, what are your expectations for what those guys can do this upcoming season? Do you have any expectations for either of those two guys?
I mean, Goodwin, if he somehow wins a spot on the roster, he's probably a special team guy. And if he shows out and he looks like a solid, solid, say, second or solid nickel guy, third guy in those first 4 games and takes that third spot from Jalen Collins. I mean, I want Jalen Collins to succeed as much as the next guy just because he was a second-round pick. But if Goodwin ends up playing better than Collins did, let him play. Let him keep playing. Let him play special teams. He's about the size of a safety, so let him go out there and play like that. And Hooper, I think Hooper's going to end up starting by the end of the season. I think come week 7, week 8, Hooper's going to be the tight end starter over Jacob Tamme. And Tammy's not going to be mad about it because he's still going to play about 50% of the snaps with how much Shanahan likes running those 2 tight end sets.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate assessment projection. I suspect most of, at least our top 4 picks to all be starting at some point later this season. To me, it's only a matter of when as opposed to if. Okay. So the other big development for the Falcons was they released their unofficial depth chart. Scott, have you had the chance to give it a gander?
I have. I do like a couple things that I'm seeing.
Okay.
The first is Wes Schweitzer is the backup left guard, which means that long term, that's probably where they want to slot him. Have his size in between Matthews and Mack. I think that's a good fit for him. And Mike Person is really the guy competing with Chester at right guard, is what that says to me. Harris and Compton as the top 2 tackles. That's kind of obvious. And I like starting with the offensive line because you go closest to the ball. The surprise to me is Ben Garland as the backup center. It makes sense based on his athletic profile and based on what he is, but I do think that it's probably the best fit for him to potentially make the roster. I just think when it comes down to it, you can basically look at the 3rd string and cut them off the roster and look at Ben Garland and cut him off the roster, and you'll have the 9 guys that are on the roster at offensive lineman. And you'll have Person basically pulling double duty as backup center and backup right guard.
That's probably what will likely happen. I am very curious to see what Garland does at center. He's got center size. We'll see how well he handles sort of, the snapping and making the calls at the line. And if he does, take well to that position, then I would love to see him make the team. I thought it was interesting, at least with the offensive line group, that they have Compton as the backup left tackle and Harris as the backup right tackle. You would assume that based off of Compton playing predominantly on the right side in Washington, and Harris has played both tackle spots, but has gotten quite a bit of experience playing left tackle, that they would be switched. But I'm sure throughout the preseason, they will both play either side of the line, because that's how the Falcons usually do it. But it is interesting that at least in the initial depth chart, that Compton is playing on the left side as opposed to the right.
It's funny because when he was at South Dakota, the little that I could see of him, he looked like he had trouble moving to his right. And he mainly played on the left side, either guard or tackle, but he mainly played left tackle. And when you saw him moving to his right, you were like, okay, he's probably going to struggle. So when Washington put him on the right side, it was like, okay, he's probably going to struggle, and he struggled. I'd like to see him stick on the left side. I don't think that he's a great backup left tackle, but I do think he's a better left tackle than a right tackle for him. I think he's a better left tackle than probably Bryce Harris is. And I'd like to see Bryce Harris play a little bit more right tackle. I'd like to see Lawrence Gibson play a little bit more right tackle too, and see how those guys actually compare. But I do like Compton better as the left side than the right side.
Yeah, okay. Any other things on the offense that sort of stood out to you looking over it?
Aldrick Robinson basically as the fourth receiver, because Julio and Sanu are the top two. Hardy's the third. I don't think that's going to change unless Hardy somehow beats Sanu out. And then Robinson's the fourth, which is really nice to see, because that's some speed you can throw on the outside and the inside. Someone who can beat a defense deep. Weems, Williams, Fuller, all those guys competing for those last two spots. It's going to be fun. I can't wait to see Brandon Wiles and Gus Johnson run this offseason now. Those are two backs that I wanted the Falcons to get during their college careers. I thought they were both solid running backs, both good fits for the zone scheme. So I'd love to see Wiles beat out Ward for the third spot, because he has some power that Coleman and Freeman just don't have. And he's massive. He's like 6 foot tall, 220.
Mm-hmm.
But on the offensive side, that's probably the biggest thing. If Ward is going to be out on Thursday, I want to see Wiles and Johnson. Give me like 2 carries for Devontae, 3 carries for Coleman, and then Ward and Johnson, or Johnson and Wiles for the rest of the day.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to see anybody else touch the ball, because we know what Freeman and Coleman can do. We know that they're going to be fine. I'm worried about the other guys.
Yeah, I'm with you. I hope Teron Ward gets healthy, but it would be a great opportunity to see what Johnson and Wiles can really do. Looking at the rest of the offense, I am curious that they have Hardy as the backup to Julio, because Julio plays the X and Sanu plays the Z. The Z was Roddy's old spot, and Hardy played predominantly at the Z last year when he was at least in preseason before he moved to the slot during the regular season. And I'm curious if they're putting Hardy there because of just randomness, or will he actually play some more X this summer and just sort of to cross-train him to allow him to play either spot. So that'll be curious to see how that actually plays out when we get into the actual games, because the thing about these depth charts, and it's nothing against AtlantaFalcons.com, they do their job. They ask for the depth chart. Some intern or some coach or somebody gives them the depth chart and they put it up. They give them what they put up what they pay for. But often when we get into the actual preseason games, how it actually breaks down is a little different. That guy plays right guard instead of left guard. This guy plays X receiver instead of Z receiver, and little things like that change. And so it'll be interesting to see how much this one actually messes up, because in previous years, it's usually about 70% accurate, and there's like another 30% that's sort of a little off. But we'll see how it goes. Let's move to the defensive side of the ball, Scott. And at least for me, the big thing that really jumped out to me on either side of the ball was Courtney Upshaw playing D tackle. I know Dan Quinn had mentioned last week that they were going to try Upshaw playing some inside. It sounds like him into the same sort of role that Cleveland plays, which is like predominantly a pure nickel pass rusher. And given the fact that he's potentially putting pounds, it does make a little bit of sense. Where do you rest on Upshaw and some of the other things you're looking at depth chart?
I mean, I like the idea of Upshaw playing defensive tackle. Last week I compared it to Rod Coleman, who basically played defensive end his entire life and then moved down to a 3 technique randomly and actually had production because that's where he should have been playing all along because his quickness was too much for guards. And I think that could be Upshaw's best role. I don't think he's a good fit outside. I think he has issues with speed. I don't think he's really quick enough to play that role. But he's got a great bull rush. He's got strength. He actually has length if you're comparing him to interior players. And I think you could take advantage of that in a pass rush set with Babineau on the field and have Upshaw and Babineau basically attacking the interior of the defense. Now, when you look at the edges, give me 1 second here. Just dropped out for some reason. I think he's having some technical difficulties. When you do look at the ends, and even just the front 7 depth chart in general, I don't think that you're going to get exactly how these guys are going to be used. The front 7 depth chart leaves a lot for interpretation. Like, yeah, you've got all these guys listed as defensive end, defensive tackle, linebacker. They are going to be used in a variety of ways. You're going to see Vic Beasley as a linebacker in the end. You're going to see Tyler Starr as a linebacker in the end. The Falcons haven't really set they don't put out their exact, oh, hey, this is how this guy's going to be used. And I wish more teams would actually put the proper depth chart of how they use guys. Like, hey, these are our nickel rushers. Hey, these are our base defense. Hey, this is what we do in this package. But you're talking about too much stuff that would be that would give opponents a competitive advantage if you put that stuff online. Like, oh, hey, this is the base. It's going to be Brooks Reed, Tyson Jackson, Grady Jarrett, and Rashid Hageman. Boom, there's the base package. And Vic Beasley, Deion Jones, Devondre Campbell, that's the linebacker core. So I don't think we're going to have an exact match for exactly how these guys are going to be used in the front 7. Now, at cornerback, I think that's pretty much 100% how it's lining up right now. And I think it's very possible that we're going to see Alford, Collins, Trufant, King, those guys all set with a roster spot. Goodwin gets a roster spot. Outside of that, who knows? Will they keep Poole? Will they keep Niesman? Will they keep Parms? Will Van Dyke surprise and somehow get a spot? We don't know. We're going to have to wait and see. Okay. And then Aaron put in here, how much does the first depth chart really matter? When you're talking the first preseason depth chart, it's pretty much irrelevant. You're basically talking about who are the first guys that are going to be on the field, how are the packages going to line up, who's going to have first shot at kick returner, who's going to have first shot at punt returner. I do like that they're trying to get Tevin Coleman some more touches as kick returner. I hope he sticks. I would love to see him stick as the kick returner. I think that would be the best possible way to use him and get him 4 touches, 5 touches a game, and have an explosive guy out there. who could get, 150, 200 yards easy a game. And that's all purpose. That's including kick and punt and everything else. All right. Now, Cookie by Nature says thoughts on the unofficial depth chart. I think we just covered that. Or I just covered that. And then we have just one more question, it looks like. So, your boy Jay94 says, who are you guys looking forward to seeing play Thursday? Give me 1 second. Let me see if I can get Aaron back. Personally, I'm looking forward to see how this front seven looks. I'm looking forward to seeing Dwight Freeney if they'll put him on the field. I'm looking forward to seeing Babineau, Tyson Jackson. I know it sounds crazy that I'm looking forward to seeing Tyson Jackson, but I want to see how Tyson Jackson actually plays this year. I want to see if he can play defensive tackle in this scheme. I want to see if Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman can pick up where they left off and eventually just look amazing. I want to see Alex Mack throwing people around. Because if we don't see Alex Mack throw people around, I think we're having some issues. But, yeah, I mean, that's who I'm looking forward to seeing. Let me see if I can find any more mailbag questions to delay this. Otherwise, it's going to be a short show tonight. It looks like it's going to be a very short show. We did have some technical difficulties. I do apologize for that. I know Aaron probably feels bad about it. And you can find me at at Karasik S. You can find Aaron at Falcons. Read Falcons.com. Aaron posts a ton of articles. I'll post up articles on Sportsnot every now and again. And have a good week. We'll be back next week. Apologies for the short broadcast.